Hello and welcome to Radical Democracy. I'm Maddie Cheers. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we have our very special guest and my special friend, Marianne Francisi, who is the author of The Sacred Weave of Mothering and also the author of The Surrogate Church, which is
Yes.
a play. And she is a poet and she is principal of Spark Elementary of I wouldn't even call it progressive. I would just call it a light in the darkness school.
Oh, I love that,
And I
Maddie.
love the name Spark
I
because of
love
that.
it. A light in the dark.
So we are here today to talk about the hero's journey, and Marianne has done a lot of work with the hero's journey in her lifetime, in her own personal journey. And what I really want to talk about, which we were talking about earlier, getting here, is this idea that we have lost heroes. I'm not the only one to notice it. There's been a lot of writing about this. Why in our culture do we seem to not see heroes around? We don't have people that we would define as heroic. And people who are sacrificing, people who are of service to others, that we do know some of them, but they're not the people we see as our leaders. As a matter of fact, I can't personally think of a single leader that we have in political leader in this country that I would hold up as a hero for anybody. I think there are some individual people around who are extremely heroic in the way they live their lives, but they're not known. So I asked Marianne here today, and we're going to talk about the idea of radical calling. One of the things about being a hero is that you are more called into service for others. And as our culture gets more focused on individualism, where are we seeing these people that are called to service, or how can we become a person like that? So I'm going to turn it over to you, Marianne.
Well, it is interesting because the first phase of the hero's journey is the call, where something it hits you, and it usually hits you in the heart. It's not a practical kind of thought out mission. Your heart is pulled to do something. And truth is that it is connected to a type of a service, usually. And you either heed the call or you deny the call. And in denying the call, what ends up happening is your heart begins to shut off from your truth because it's an inner truth. It is as close to your inner divinity as you're going to get. But to heed the call, there is reluctance, and that is one of the key qualities. No hero wants to be a hero.
Right.
They don't go into a journey feeling like, this is going to get me to be seen as a hero. It is usually, no, I don't want this, but it is not leaving me alone. And I have to walk forward with it. And I think that's the first level of courage because most of us, when we think of the qualities of a hero, the first thing I think of is courage. Is that
Yes.
what you think of? And there are many levels of courage. There's the courage of putting your life on the line, but there's also the courage to take the risk of going into the unknown.
Right.
I don't know how this is going to turn out, but I am called to do this. And that, in fact, is one of the first phases of the calling process.
Yes, and I think that that is the part that is the hardest. It is like you said, you make that choice. Yesterday, when I was sitting in with my husband, I told you about this. That we were talking. He was talking to the group that he was teaching about the warrior, and about how the warrior chooses to sacrifice, but it's always the choice, and that the courage to make the choice. You're choosing, like you just said, one or the other. And many of us choose not to heed the calling. And I would never condemn anybody for that, because often the calling to be of service, it's like you said, you're not really thinking of being the hero. You just have this thing going on in your head that says, I have to speak this truth. I have to do this truth. I have to defend my family. Um, that that the choice has become, this is what I'm going to do.
Mhm.
If you're really called, when you don't make the choice, I do think, like you said, it can become detrimental not just to you but to the community. And I
Absolutely.
think that in making the choice to go on this journey, your concern is for the entire community. So the the hero is not just looking at this as, I'm doing this for myself, I'm doing this for my family, I'm doing this for what I believe in.
Mhm.
He or she is looking at it as, I'm doing this for the greater good. I know this truth in myself. I know I have to follow this calling. So this is really about the greater good.
Well, and there's a distinction between what we're called to and our dream. And I think
Mm,
that's part of the confusion with this idea of individualism, because we're raised to feel like, oh, we can have our dreams, and that is the calling. That's what we go after. So if we look at even what I went through with taking over Spark Elementary, with developing that. So, when I first started at Spark and I was in partnership with my sister and my husband at the time, I said from the very beginning, running an elementary school is not my dream. I'm here, I like it, I love to inspire the kids, but that's not my dream. My dream is to write, to produce, to get my words out there. I love that. That's the dream. But I was called to this position of becoming a mentor and problem solver with young children, which is actually a very natural evolution of the greatest medicine I think I possess, which is mother medicine, taking care of my own children. Now I'm a leader with these little kids, but the whole time, the first 7 years of the work, I was saying, no, no, this isn't my thing. I'm not going to be doing this forever. And then it finally hit me like, it doesn't matter if this is my dream or not. I am called to be here. I am making a difference, and I am having an impact on the future of our planet, on our little children and the way they're
right,
educated.
right.
So to be called, it's not fun.
No.
It's not like, wow, I found my calling. Is it satisfying? Yes, but it's also heartbreaking and
Yep.
mundane and
Mm-hmm.
awful sometimes and boring as hell and everything else that goes with showing up regularly with an alignment for a higher purpose,
Right.
which is to transform something for the better.
Right. And it's more dangerous than ever now, I think, to follow a calling because of social media. As
Mm,
we were just talking about earlier today between us and the family, is that with social media nowadays, anything you say can be completely taken out of context, fed into a Twitter feed, and you can be portrayed as any one of 100 horrible things: a racist, a bigot, a Nazi. Uh, and really, all that's happened is you disagree with someone. And if that someone you disagree with has a big enough following, they are
mhm.
going to. I just saw this happen to a friend of mine, that she is being portrayed as this horrible person because of a joke that she made, and it really was not even a joke. It was about being called. She was she is she was it was about she listed a series of names that could have been chosen that would have been funnier to call her, or she wasn't funnier, more hurtful.
Mm.
You know, she was called a particular name in dealing with this particular website, right? Because of her particular beliefs. And I'm not going to get into that now because it's too much of a tangent. But what happened was she gave a list of other names that would have been more clever. And one of those names was connected to someone who had been in the Nazi movement.
Mm.
Now, her point was that if you're trying to hurt me, do this. But it was taken out of context and said, oh, she said this name and she aligned it with Nazism and she's a Nazi and she's, you know, it's what happens is today it becomes dangerous to speak your truth.
Well, and that is part of the whole mythical journey,
Yeah.
right? So
Yep.
Joseph Campbell, who really is the one who helped us to see what is this process of a hero's journey. And he looked at stories from every culture over time. And he found certain key elements that define this process of the journey. And one of the pieces is the ability to endure certain kinds of obstacles.
Mm.
And so I think our social media is a tricky kind of guide
Yep.
for us right now. That's the other key piece of a hero's journey is that you meet guides along the way
Mm.
who help you, who give you clues, who carry you along. But we also have false guides.
Yep.
And I think social media can very well become a false guide. It gives a certain portrayal, both positive and negative, that isn't completely accurate.
Right.
And here, your friend has been swallowed by it. And there's actually a phase called the belly of the whale in the hero's journey, where you just are like swallowed up. And what are you going to do? Are you going to just let yourself be digested, or are you going to like get spit back out into the journey? So all along the way, the hero is tested and challenged and faced with obstacles and is beaten down.
Yeah.
And the question is, are you able to continue to endure the path? And why should you? And the only way you can is if it's a higher mission.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, absolutely. And that I found so interesting, this statement when I was looking into quantum entanglement, as I just said to you
I love that.
today.
I love
Well, I
that.
know, don't you love that?
I
So
love
for
it,
those of you
yes.
not familiar with quantum entanglement, guess what? We're all connected. Science finally proved what Native Americans have been saying all along. What we do to the web, as Chief Seattle said, we do to ourselves because we are all connected. So quantum entanglement comes from an experiment that was done where they split a photon, and the two photons are now at 14 miles apart, something like this, and they do one thing to one photon, and the other photon reacts exactly the same way. They look at the atomic clock, and how much time has passed? 0. No, it happened at exactly the same time. So I know, crazy, right? So now we know there is no time on the quantum level, and that somehow all of this is connected. All of us, the universe, everything. It is all connected. So when you look at the world that way, and you look at the hero's journey in that way, you get beyond the for and against. You get beyond the duality. That to me is what the journey of the hero is going more towards the oneness, the community, the unity. And I just recently heard in one of the lectures I was listening to this statement that it's a Zen teaching where it says the most dangerous disease of humanity is the for or against mind.
Yes.
And this is where without the guidance of a hero or heroes, and without the guidance of of the vision of what it is to be heroic and be of service, we simply end up splitting.
And what I would add to that, I think just as dangerous, because I love that idea of it's the for or against mind, but it's also the mind of above or below.
Mm,
And part of the difficulty with hero is a hero is elevated.
yeah.
I am above you. There is not a true hero who ever feels above anybody
No.
else. And but as human beings, we want to put that hero up on the pedestal and say, you've got something I don't have. And you are above me and you know better than me.
Right.
Where the equalizing is we are both walking the same path.
Right.
I am choosing to look at my path as a hero's journey because I'm seeking meaning.
Yep.
I'm seeking revelation. I am enduring the obstacles because I carry a faith that says the obstacle will ultimately lead me to my destiny. And my destiny, what is revealed to me, I am obligated to share with all of the circle.
Right.
And there is again these I the for and against, it's like the horizontal plane, the above and below is the vertical plane. So we're talking about breadth and depth
Right.
of life and of truly coming to a deeper understanding and look at where we are, how did we get here, and how can we get this going in a way that is going to be transcendent? Because anything can be destructive or constructive.
Exactly.
The ultimate destination of the hero's journey is home.
Mm.
And in the hero's journey, it's so beautiful the way that Campbell phrases it. Home is really the divine feminine.
Mm-hmm.
It is the fertile void. It is the place of creation for all people.
Right.
And the arrival there then renews hope and restores the possibility of creating something different.
Right. And just the idea, the metaphor of giving birth, we are gestated, we are grown in darkness, and then we are birthed into the light. And in not an easy way. I mean, every mother is in her own way a hero
Mm-hmm.
because she is going through pain and sacrifice and always the risk of death to bring forth the next generation. And without the connection to this idea of the future, of the continuation of humanity, we start to lose the hero, I think,
Mm-hmm.
because there is the idea when you look at indigenous cultures, and a lot of the people who were leaders could not be leaders, either men or women, unless they had children. There
Mm-hmm.
wasn't really an age. It was just considered that you were more unselfish if you had children. So, and I think, I think that's really true. And I think when you are looking, what ultimately happens with the hero is everybody is their children. Everybody becomes
Mm-hmm.
their responsibility,
Yes.
so that they really feel that that's what makes them go beyond the for and or against mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's beyond the duality. And that's what I like in Curan Durismo, the statement "O Mateo," because it recognizes the duality of male and female, and the oneness that came before it.
Right. And that same duality is um, so if we say the obstacle is ultimately the destiny, it is that same look of light and dark is always present at the
Right.
same time. What we think is the end is in fact the beginning,
Right.
and it's seeing that exist at the same time in the same circle
Yep.
rather than on two different mountains, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's not split in a way. And even what you just said about the quantum physics, even if we are on two separate mountains, we are still
Connect.
experiencing the same thing. We are still connected
Right.
to that same possibility. Mm.
And when we look at on Father's Day, when we look at the divine masculine, they act in and if you can't look if you don't want to look at it as divine, because I do have people that write to me after the show or family members that are like, "Oh, well, you're getting into all that religious spiritual stuff." And you know, so my personal belief is those of you who listen to the show know is that there is a level, an element of spirituality which I was pleased to find out this week that Max Planck, one of the fathers of quantum physics, was one of the first people to also say that there is some higher intelligence behind all of this.
Mm.
So so it's not just little old me or religious people or spiritual people that believe there's something greater beyond what we can see and prove right in front of our faces, and that there are other ways of knowing things. So when we are looking at those who are trying to reconnect us, which to me is the ultimate message of the hero's journey, is this journey home when you're talking about the fertile void, is these are people who, when they feel their calling, there's some element of trying to reconnect us, of trying to get all of us to raise our consciousness, if you prefer that term, as opposed to spirit, to raise our consciousness, our way of thinking, our way of dealing with each other, so that we are more loving and more caring.
And that's, basically we look at four phases of the hero's journey. So it begins with the calling. And once you've accepted the call, then there is a process of commitment to the call. You commit to the call and you begin to prepare for the call.
Right.
This is all part of that first phase. You invoke support from whoever is your supportive network. And then you make your way to the threshold of the unknown.
Mm.
And that is, in fact, the scariest piece. And we were talking about on the way here our astronauts, right? Our
Right.
first men who went out into space. They truly were voyaging into the unknown.
Right.
How terrifying. But that is the threshold that we can face on that kind of magnitude if you're going off into space or if you're just crossing into something you've never done before
Right.
and know nothing about and just have to go. Like you running for Congress, Maddie, right? It's like, okay, you're
We're,
called.
we're astronauts going to inner space.
Right. Yes, yes. So then the next phase is known as the road of trials. And during the road of trials, you are faced with many, many obstacles. And you also meet guides and you have clues, and the universe kind of supports you, but you're also knocked down. And one of the phases in the road of trials is called entering the house of opposites.
Mm.
And in the house of opposites, it is really coming to accept that for everything light, there is dark. For everything dark, there is light,
Right.
and they exist together. And it is an integration of both sides of yourself. Because one of the things about a hero, again, the association is you're good, you're all good. And the greatest hero has his shadow,
Right.
and he must or she must own that shadow and manage it, otherwise it'll wreak havoc. And that at the end of this road of trials, there's a moment where it's called meeting the goddess.
Hmm.
And again, it's very beautiful symbolism. And in meeting the goddess is where you come to understand the point of the suffering,
Hmm.
the sacrifice. This is what it's about. And this is what I have to bring back. And this whole process is a descent, right? From the
Right.
time you take that call down through your road of trials, At that bottom point is the meeting of the goddess. It is the rock bottom.
Mm.
And once you get that piece of information, if you've made it through there and you're still standing, then becomes the return. And in returning, it's all about bringing this information back to the community. But there is a return road of trials.
Yeah.
And there comes a point for the hero where there's the question of, do I really want to now have to return and share this message? Like, I've been through enough. I'm happy. I got it. I don't need to go tell everybody about it. But you move through it, and then you finally cross the threshold back into community. And the hero is received back, but the community is also waiting to hear, what did you discover? What did you learn? And there is the final phase of completion. Without going through those 4 phases, it's not a hero's journey.
Right.
You have to complete the circle, the full phase.
Yep. And I think that it's on the return that many people give up.
You're right.
I think that is where it actually becomes the scariest, because once you go into the unknown, then you're sort of like, okay, well, I took the step, now I'm here.
Yes.
So now you have to deal with whatever comes. And then once you get the message or the enlightenment, and now you have to share it, it's that return journey. It's like what you said. Well, can't I just sit here and be happy knowing this? And you can't. There is some element of that, that knowingness that pushes you forward. It has something to do, I guess, with our connection. It has something to do with getting to that universal knowledge that pushes you to, you've just got to complete the journey.
Well, that's funny you say that, because there is actually a place in the return journey that's called the magical flight. And it's really where your guides kind of swoop in and like pull you forward. Like, nope, you're not just staying stuck here. Fly out of here. But I think part of it is because you come up against opposition.
Right.
Which is great. Opposition creates conversation. It creates a little conflict, but it's kind of like your friend you were talking about, who put her truth out there and then can get slammed. So you have to be able to face that fact.
Yes, exactly. And I think that in facing the journey, there's this knowingness that goes on about the connection. And I think some of us, I'm always impressed with this one young woman, and I'm not going to use her name in case she doesn't want it associated, because I couldn't get a hold of her ahead of this, but she's like 26 years old, and her knowingness, when I read her posts and I read her blogs, I'm like, there's just something bold about this kid. I do think some of us are, whether there's really such a thing as reincarnation, or some of us are just born with more receptors, so we get the message earlier, we're connected earlier. Her knowingness is really astounding, and her boldness, her fearlessness is astounding. And she is a real role model. And fortunately, she is kind of getting better known, because I really do look at her as a possible hero for our times.
That's beautiful.
And I think that when we look at men, when we are looking at the masculine, the divine masculine, this idea of protection, this idea of defending, that and providing, that when you look at the energy of how these things are defined, you are looking at our higher selves. You are looking at higher consciousness, I think, when you define what it means to be the best of a man and what it means to be the best of a woman. And then everything else falls under that. So at the bottom for both of us is this for or against mentality. So when you describe the lower levels of femininity, you're talking about the gossip and the backbiting and the stealing one man from another. If I, the seduction, and those energies. When you're talking about the lower levels of men, you're talking about the violence for the same reason, but the violence and the warmongering and the revenge and all of and the deceit. What's interesting to me is that on the lower level of both and the higher level of both is a oneness.
Right, it goes back to above and below.
Yep.
You're really the highest quality. That, to me, that's how deep you can go with your lowest quality.
Yep.
So there is this responsibility to notice and to become conscious of not just the role, right, that we're
Right.
in, but the quality of the roles that we're living.
Yep.
And how do we, because I think that really is the responsibility of a hero, right? Of a role model, is how do we keep that quality of authenticity, of being human
Right.
and being heroic? Because the human being has the potential to have both sides, the
Yep.
highest to the lowest. We have a range. The bigger our range, the more we can relate to more people, I think.
Right.
But there is a responsibility in managing those qualities that need to, be taken care of.
Right.
That can be destructive.
Exactly.
They're not all acceptable.
No, and to not recognize that, like, I really do believe that the seven deadly sins are the seven deadly sins, and especially when you look at the original meaning of the word sin, which is to be off the mark.
I like that.
So these are the attitudes and activities that can take you off your mark.
Yes.
And that when it comes to honoring those who remain on the mark, that there are many everyday heroes, like the father's sacrifice, mother's sacrifice, fathers give up. I was just talking with my father about, he said that, he sad, my mom passed away, as you know, about a year and a half ago, and he's sad, he misses her, but for the first time in his life, with the exception of a year and a half before he got married, he's on his own. He's a bachelor at 91.
Wow. Wow.
90. Well, he became a bachelor at 90. But I mean, and he said he never knew that, like, being alone could be kind of fun, and but what a father gives up in accepting the responsibility of becoming a dad and a provider and a guide and a defender is that, I get to run around and just be free.
Yes.
So I think that what also happens, what also needs redefining when we look at this in our culture, is what do we mean by freedom? Because while you know me, I am a tremendous advocate of free speech. One of the things I abhor is censorship, and we have economic censorship going on. We have political censorship, right and left. We're deplatforming people. We are demonetizing people, right and left. We are putting our culture in the hands of a few gigantic corporations, and we are buying into this. We are going, oh, that person disagrees with me. Come on, my whole group here of 500,000 people, look, I've got this gigantic following here on Facebook, and we're not going to listen to YouTube anymore unless you take this guy off or this woman off. And we are being sucked into that lower level. So freedom of speech is it has to do with the maturity of the human being. And but at the same time, freedom cannot be defined by what's best for me as the individual.
Mm.
Because if I define it as, well, this is best for me, I don't want to hear you talk. I don't want to hear what you have to say. It's like the Mean Girls Club, or the jock club, not that
Well,
all jocks were like this, but you know what I mean? It's a separatism. So the idea, the ultimate goal in of raising consciousness is is this conscious freedom that is allowed to everyone.
and with that, there are certain risks, right?
Yes. Yes.
Because if you are raising consciousness and there's a certain power that goes with that, then that power becomes something very, very frightening to lose.
Mhm.
And it sets off a kind of rigidity and closing off of others. It's so interesting. I know you weren't a fan of Game of Thrones. You didn't watch it.
Yes, I'm
But
the one
the
among the
one
one
person.
percent,
But
right?
I will tell this story because she was truly my hero. I watched it throughout. So the Dragon Mother, who was really a hero for many, many watchers through the years, she went through so much suffering, was called to power without wanting it. She defined the hero. Her cause was all about freeing the slaves, bringing justice for all. And you see through the years the amount that was sacrificed in being called to this role and the amount that was lost. And in the final season, we see how she begins to turn from this great hero to really beginning to fall from that state of grace. And what we see is that she loses the one of her dragons is killed. She loses the great love of her life. And
Mm.
she says at one point, I'm here, but nobody loves me. They
Mm.
fear me because I have these powerful weapons. And she gets to the throne, which is the ultimate destiny, and she's lost her mission.
Mm.
And it was devastating because she lost in the end her mercy,
Mm.
which is what was part of her original calling, was the mercy that she had for oppressed people. And she lost it because she no longer felt loved or felt connected to community.
Mm.
And she was able to do the unthinkable, just destroy. And that is a piece that we, and I know you've had other shows in touching on this matter, but as a culture, we gloss over the grief
Mhm.
that comes with sacrifice
Right.
and the importance of really reconnecting and loving the people who have lost along the way for the sake of good.
Right.
Because you can be aligned in good and turn really bad
Yep.
without love and without community and without a sense of meaning.
Exactly.
You become very vulnerable because when all you have to hold on to is power, then you're going to oppress others.
Yes, you're going to. And I think that's where I love in David Hawkins' book, the first book he wrote, Power versus Force. Dr. Hawkins wrote. I just love that term because he talks about what is real power
Mm.
versus force. So real power would have been had she stayed in that place of mercy and love. That was really power because that is what ultimately changes and creates the new world, as opposed to force, which is simply what destroys the old. And sometimes, truly, the old has to be destroyed for the new to arise. But how that old is destroyed, whether it's transformed, whether it's transfigured, or whether it's actually beaten down and killed in a violent manner, is where the break is between who remains the hero and who becomes the
Wow,
destroyer.
that's exactly what happens in Game of Thrones, actually.
Yeah.
Right? That is right there. That is exactly what we saw played out and why were so many of us fixated
Yep.
on this series. And and one of the final lines in the show was where a character stood up and said the one thing that we are all compelled to do is to follow a good story,
Yeah.
right? And that is the hero's journey, is a magnificent story
Right.
because there's always transcendence. There's always you suffer, but you come out like something is better for it.
Right. And that is, I was just having this discussion too about the problem with statistics. All right. So we, especially being in the political climate we are in, people are throwing around statistics right and left. And then a friend of mine told me about having worked with this statistician who ultimately left the profession. She used to work for politicians because she was lying. She
Mm.
said basically statistics can be completely manipulated depending on how you ask the question and to whom you're asking it. So so you are manipulating truth, sort of truth, I should say, for the benefit of somebody seeking what I'm now going to term as force. Because power, I believe, is what comes from the heart.
Mm.
Force is what comes from the ego. So what when we look at these stories, it should remind us to look at each other's stories. So when you're having these discussions and people are citing all these statistics, and I just said this today or wrote it to someone today, I am not interested in the statistics because I know how they can be manipulated, and we're all going to have to be smart enough to recognize that. I
Mhm.
am interested in somebody's story.
Because that is the connector.
Yes.
And if we're going to look at power from the heart, right, then in the place of heartbreak, of loss, of sacrifice,
Right.
I do think the heart has two choices. It is either going to open up in vulnerability and mercy,
Right.
or it will close off and be merciless, right?
Exactly.
So it's so, wow, Maddie. So it's kind of like how hero feels strong, right? I'm thinking about my association. It feels strong and powerful. But truly, the true hero must have the courage to really express the vulnerability. I think at this point in our society,
Yes.
it is not about a false strength
No.
or a sense of courage. It is the vulnerability that ultimately connects us to how many of us actually carry stories that we don't even tell.
No.
We
And
don't,
no.
because they're painful or shameful or difficult to share.
Right. Or we've been stereotyped. I mean, a lot of what goes on nowadays that I really find distressing is the amount of stereotyping and
Mhm.
labeling. I think I told you when I sat in that room for a day doing the training for running for office, and we were basically asked to sit in our groups and talk about our core purpose in running, our core issue. And we agreed so much more than we disagreed. I mean, I didn't hear a single issue that any woman brought up that I did not agree with, that I did not think needed to be addressed. And her story, what they also encouraged us to do was to tell the story behind why this is your core issue. And the stories were beautiful and heartbreaking and happy and sad and all involving grief. What
Really?
motivated, this is what I saw, what motivated people like the mother who is running because her son was an Afghanistan war hero, and he died waiting for VA services for 6.5 hours. He died because he had a severe infection, and he waited and waited and waited. And so her issue is, if anybody deserves, if we have to make any part of our system work effectively, it has to be the Veterans Administration healthcare system. And she further went on to say, and I even wrote about this later, that, and I looked this up, that the Veterans Administration is our only true example right now of what we would call universal health care. If we can't make this work, how are we going to make it work for 330 million people? Where we can't, we have to, at a point, we have to listen to these stories of people, and the other young woman who's running because her the education system in her community has fallen apart. And this woman is truly brave. You could tell from the way she was talking, she does not have the kind of education you and I have. But she has the passion because she realizes that if public education isn't changed, her people, her children, her community have no hope in the future. She comes from a poverty-stricken community that has been a welfare community for a long time, and that the education services that we are providing simply are not speaking to this population.
So here you're talking about these women who, in a way, they are having a voice and taking a stand for something that is going to benefit their line going backward and forward in time.
Yes.
So it says all the suffering that came before us, every generation that suffered, every person that died because of this, it will be worth it.
Yeah.
Because I am here now, and I am going to speak to what you suffered so that the generations going forward don't have to endure that. That makes it worthwhile.
Yes.
It becomes the whole line. Like what I'm actually seeing is like sort of a constellation of stars like lighting up in that moment.
Right.
Because it's everyone that came before her. The 7 generations we've talked about in Native American thinking, you're always thinking about the 7 generations that are to come next in
Right.
a decision you make. But how about the 7 generation that endured before you, who were behind you,
Right.
and they then stand behind you as
It's
a
their
resource.
wisdom.
Yes.
Yes.
And it then allows for just a level of resolve,
Right.
an exhale. And it's interesting because I just came through a very difficult divorce, and part of the process of it was really navigating my 4 children through it. And so I come from a hero's journey mindset, which is very much about, okay, enduring, finding meaning, transcending, bringing whatever I learned forward. And there came a point in the process where I actually sat down and said, I am giving myself permission not to be heroic. Maddie, it was such a relief.
Mm-hmm.
And that we have to be careful with too, I think, when we talk about hero's journey, is that there is a certain belief that it needs to be difficult
Yeah.
to get meaning. There needs to be loss, sacrifice. And in the moment where I said, I give myself permission not to be heroic, and it was a relief, I thought, well, what will be different now? And for me, the difference was I am not going to rush the process of understanding or making the change I want to see.
Right.
Because I realized that it was going to take a long time for there to
Yes.
be any form of reconciliation and peace in my family. And that that was it.
Yep.
That was really it. Allow it to happen in its own time. So, that, as I say it out loud now, I don't think that's a resignation from the hero, being the hero or being heroic. I think it's actually was just the idea that like we don't have to accelerate everything, right?
Right.
Aren't we
Right.
in a culture where it feels like so
Oh,
quick?
too fast.
We have to
Yes.
get to the point, to the end, to the understanding, write the next book, go up and talk about
Yeah.
it. Like maybe it's going to take more time than that.
And that is exactly part of the problem we are facing with the hero's journey today.
Mm.
Is this idea that everything has to happen now, and this constant state of rushing, and this constant checking how many followers do you have, this constant
Urgency.
urgency, and putting and comparing yourself one to the other, and oh, it happened faster for her, and how come he's doing that? That whole what in the great law of peace, where they talk about how they went to war, because they forgot to be grateful, which made them greedy and jealous. And that's what I see is part of what's going on now. So is we're greedy for somebody else's fame or somebody else's power. We're jealous of that. And then we want to steal it. And how do we steal it? We stereotype, we tweet out, it's fast, so
So
that there's
fast.
no time for the understanding. And it is the sitting down and listening to the person you disagree with, and giving yourself and that person the time to understand each other, that brings us real peace. And that has become an heroic journey in this day and age, to try and just get people to sit with each other, to calm down out of the anger, and to sit and listen and talk. We don't want to listen. Tweeting is not listening. Typing into Facebook is not listening.
Because even if it's as simple as asking that question that was asked at the workshop that you went to, and we can have strong opinions about things, right? So we stand on our platforms and have our opinions. But when you sit down and you ask someone, like, how did you arrive at this opinion?
Right.
Like, what happened in your life that got you here? Why is it that you think this way? And for most people, it is not going to be because somebody told me.
Yeah.
It's going to be because some life happened to them,
Right.
and that's where it brought them. And then it becomes a human exchange of the just where we go when difficult things happen to us.
Right.
And
And
that is a very different conversation.
very different. And it's the conversation that the peacemaker has to have with the mothers.
So maybe, Maddie, what you're really looking at is heroic conversations,
Ooh. Yeah.
because that is really being called to truly understand where somebody else is, but also to completely be true to what you bring to the table
Right.
and engage in that without battle.
Yes.
Oh, that's
Well, and
different.
and it is, we are in desperate, I do believe we are in desperate need of it. I talk about, and I probably even mentioned it on the show before, the Lakota prediction about how when the children cry and nobody listens, it's
That's why I got called to speak.
right.
Spark.
Right.
Gotta listen to them.
It's
Right.
yes, it's the great
Yes,
shift, and it's
yes.
only a matter of how are we going to go through this. Are we going to do it the hard way or the easy way? And listening, though it takes longer, is the easy way. The fighting that's going on right now, this is taking the hard road.
It
and
is.
and I think that I just read, and I know I just said I don't believe statistics, but I know from our personal situation and listening in women's circle, especially some of the younger women, and in listening to in the spiritual circles, that so many young people know of other young people who have committed suicide. And the this if the statistic is correct for the United States, we have a 25% rise in suicide of teens and young adults, with the biggest rise among young women, where young women where young women would attempt suicide, and it was looked at as kind of a way to get attention and not be as and not complete it in the numbers that young men did, which is still sad and horrifying, whether it's men or women or girls or boys committing suicide. But they are now at parity with young men. They are being successful, quote unquote, for lack of a much better word.
Because they
at
could find
yeah.
out how to do it
So,
successfully. Much
yes,
easier.
online they're making. There are. My sister told me about suicide pacts online.
And Maddie, why do you think there's the rise?
That why I
Yeah,
think
what's
there's a
your
rise because we are disconnecting. We are not listening to each other. We are substituting social media for true socialization. We have when I was listening to the studies that were done about morality and ethics back in the starting in the 70s and the 80s, one of the conclusions that they came to, and of course you know this, we talked about this on the way here, is that children develop their sense of morality and ethics through playing with each other. You know, that this problem solving, this waiting your turn, this creating games, this, you know, this working as a social unit, as a team, that all of this feeds into that I'm looking at the wrong timing, that all of this feeds into whether or not we end up with a sense of connection and a sense of morality, and kids aren't playing together
And
anymore.
I think they don't quite get the idea of commitment.
Yep, I
Right?
think that's true.
That what we are committed to this life, and part of what is missing, maybe it is just the idea that everyone's life is a hero's journey.
Yeah.
And there will be obstacles, and there will be dark places, and you'll be swallowed in the belly of the whale,
Yeah.
but you'll get spit out again, and eventually you will come to know what you're going to know. So maybe there needs to be more story, Maddie,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
From
there
the
does.
start,
Yes.
so that our children know that this is all part of their heroic journey. They don't have to say goodbye. They're committed for
Right.
this lifetime.
Exactly.
There is a commitment, and every phase of life has a different set of struggles and initiations
Right. And rites of passage.
and rites of passage, and you've got a community who's going to get you through it.
Exactly.
So that feels pretty critical.
Yep. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So next week we actually are going to talk more about storytelling, because I'm going to have on Campbell Dalglish, who is my dear friend, but also a documentary filmmaker, and we're going to talk about film as activism and telling people's stories as to why they have become activists. I want to thank Ryan so much, my wonderful producer, and Bobby Lacera, the wonderful owner of wonderful Strong Island Television Radio Entertainment Group. I want to thank all of you for listening, and have a wonderful Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to all of the fathers and all the single moms who are also being fathers. Thank you for listening. Peace, love, rock and roll. Bye.